When did sheer luck save you from catastrophe? So I would say I was around 10 years old and my family decides to take the dog for a walk. I decide I want to rollerblade and make big circles around my family as they walk. At one point, I end up a block ahead of my family and a rusty, beat-up truck pulls up and stops, and a guy jumps out. I remember him having a super short beard. He says, "Hey kid, check this out." And he pulls out a skateboard and rides it on the street and says, "Pretty cool skateboard, huh kid? You want it?" I, being completely happy with my rollerblades, say, "No thank you." He says, "Come on, it's free, just come over here and take it." I said, "No, I like my rollerblades." At this point, he looks down the street and sees my family walking up it. Without saying anything to me, he throws his skateboard in the back, jumps in his truck and drives away. I never thought it was weird, didn't tell my parents, and in my head it was like, some dude just tried to give me a skateboard I didn't want. 10 years later, I'm like, holy frick, thank God I didn't fricking like skateboards. In short, didn't get kidnapped because I thought skateboards suck. Finding out from an auntie from my dad's side that my parents were going to let my mum's sister and husband adopt me as a baby because they were childless for a long time. If the transaction happened, it would have been kept a secret. Thank goodness it never happened. The woman is a nutcase and the husband ended up divorcing her after they had a son. Their kid grew up whacked and feral and my parents became his guardian. The poor kid didn't even know how to wipe his butt and had to be spoon-fed at age 10. This one happened to someone else, but it's still interesting. I'm 16 years old and last year when I was walking home from school, I saw two little kids that couldn't be older than 9 who were walking home a little bit in front of me. I assumed they were brother and sister. Anyway, me being so much bigger with longer legs, I eventually started to catch up to them, and right when I was about to turn off into my street, I noticed a car pull up next to them and ask them to get in. My heart stopped when I heard the older one say, "But mister, we don't know you." After that, I kept walking towards them and screamed out, "Lucy, Mark," because I didn't know their actual names, and they both looked at me. I ran up and said, "Guys, don't run off on me like that. Stay close." I pretended like I didn't see the car pulled up next to them and walked with them until the car drove off. They asked me who I was, but I just kept telling them to be quiet until the man goes away. When the guy left, I told them not to talk to strangers and walked them home. I explained to their parents what happened, and I don't think I've ever seen more grateful parents. Don't talk to strangers, kids. So wait, who are you now? Shut up and do what I tell you to do. Which stranger to trust, the calm ones who park next to you in their car, or the one who runs up screaming and pretending to be your sibling? I'm going to say that the assertiveness of this author probably saved those kids. First, let it be known that I have a gift/curse where people feel like they can tell me their life story. Strangers especially. I rode the city bus from a ghetto part of town to Homelessville, where I had to transfer to home. There were a few regulars, but every now and again there'd be someone new and inevitably they'd sit next to me. I was at the transfer bus stop with 3 other people. An old man who spoke no English, so I'd never spoken to. This twitchy gang dude had gotten on the first bus a few stops after I did. Then there was a man in a suit. He looked like the love child of a successful black guy and The Rock. He sat next to me and started a conversation. I don't remember exactly what it was, but something about his line of questioning creeped me out. On the surface, it wasn't anything like, "What undies are you wearing, little girl?" And aside from sitting way too close, he didn't try to touch me. Maybe I was just too wary of strangers, but I just didn't want to talk to him, and I hoped he got onto another bus. However, I was raised to be polite and couldn't think of a way to tell this guy to please stop talking to me. Then twitchy gangbanger plops down next to me on my other side, also too close. Now I'm sandwiched between 2 guys, and Twitch was almost leaning over me. He starts talking loud and fast, rambling and mumbling to where I can't understand a word. Creepy guy eventually gets up to go stand next to no English, but I still have Mr. Twitchy. Twitchy then proceeds to tell me his life story. He claimed to be in a well-known gang, and I thought he was saying this to appear tough, though he was flying the right colors. He then talked about his role in the gang and how his dealer ripped him off earlier that day. He was pointing to scars on his arms and face and explaining to me how he got them. My bus came and we all climbed into it. Creeper had basically given up talking to me and sat somewhere near the front of the bus, while Twitch followed me to the back. He wasn't as close as he had been before, so I calmed down ever so slightly. It also helped that I was sitting next to a regular who was blind, so if push came to shove, I could whip Twitch with the cane. He kept up with the constant monologue and didn't stop until Creeper got off the bus. Twitch then says, "Oh, I thought that weirdo was never gonna leave," and runs off. Before he does, I hear him asking the driver the quickest route to get back to where we'd been picked up. I went home and using the location and many hours, I found out that Creeper was a convicted, unspeakable act offender. A month later, I also saw a very familiar mugshot in the paper. Twitch was arrested for murder. In short, had a nice talk with a gang member who, it turned out, killed a lot of people. Also, he got on the wrong bus to protect a 16-year-old girl from an unspeakable act offender. Mine was a few months after I'd turned 21. I'm from India and frequently make trips from my house to Bombay, to one in another state around 1,000 kilometers away. It's a 20-hour journey because I prefer buses over trains. I've been doing it for over 15 years and always booked the exact same seat, 4 seats down from the driver on his side. This particular time, though, I booked my ticket late and instead got a seat on the opposite side of the bus. We'd just stopped for dinner, and once done, I got back to my seat and settled down with a book. As soon as we turned back into the highway, there was a thud and a lot of dust and glass flying around. Turns out a truck rammed into the side of the bus. No one was hurt more than a few scratches. However, in my usual seat, there was a lady about 5 feet tall, and there was a huge block of wood that was stuck over her head. If I'd gotten in that seat, I'd have been decapitated. Was quite a what the frick moment and gave me some perspective on life. In short, didn't get my usual seat on the bus, was spared a decapitation. When I was about 7 years old, my twin, an older brother, and I had gone with a family friend to go to his mother's house. This was nothing out of the ordinary, as we'd gone with this man on several such occasions prior. We were living somewhere in Nevada at the time, nearish the California border. He'd asked my parents if it was okay for him to take the 3 of us for a visit, and my parents said yes. I'm not really sure at what time we left, but we never made it to his mother's house. I was looking forward to seeing her cat again. We drove for hours, my brother, sister, and I in the back seat. This man didn't stop to let us out for a bathroom break, and he didn't have anything other than beer for us to drink, and he was drinking as well. After another hour or so of driving, he got pulled over. He told us not to say anything to the officers. They approached his vehicle and could smell the beer coming off him in waves. They noticed us in the back seat and asked if we were his. He, of course, said yes. The officers didn't believe him. Thank God. They asked him to step out of the car and placed him under arrest. He fought them the entire time until they clubbed him into submission, just to get him in the back of the cruiser. Another CHP showed up and took us with him to a foster home, where we stayed until our parents could come to pick us up. It wasn't until 15 years later that I'd learned that the man had pretty awful intentions with the 3 of us. I never thought of the fact that he didn't bring any of my brothers with us. When the officer asked him why that was, he simply replied that the other brother would have talked. In short, kidnapped at 7, forced to drink beer when thirsty, and nearly the victim of God knows what by a drunk man before he was arrested. Let this be a lesson to parents listening. It's not just strange men you have to look out for. Even acquaintances like this can have pretty sinister intentions. Scary stuff. I was born in Boynton Beach, Florida, and spent my first few years in a home that skirted some really rough neighborhoods. Though the houses on my street were mostly low-income and minority families who were just trying to raise their kids, occasionally we'd have some break-ins or gang fights overflow into our community. For a span of a few years, we had a smack-addicted homeless man who would hit our neighborhood for easily pawnable goods to support his habit. The cops always knew it was him and would lock him up for a few months, and then when released, he'd be at it again. I was really young, just under 3 years old, the night he broke into our house for the second time. He woke me up as he was shining a flashlight into my bedroom window, looking for an easy way in. And moi, being the headstrong toddler that I was, got up to investigate the policeman's flashlight, as I later told my mum. Apparently, I must have scared the crap out of him when I sleepily greeted him as he came in through our kitchen window, because he abandoned all intention of robbing our home and instead picked me up to rock and soothe me back to sleep, laid me down on our living room couch, and hightailed it through our rear door. I'd forgotten the whole incident completely by the time my mum retold me the story later in life, and initially was freaked out by my 3-year-old description of the scary man with the long fingernails. However, I look back at it now with a level of humility. It could have been someone else, much meaner and a far more tragic situation. This man, who was bottom of the totem pole by most societal standards, an addict, homeless, and with petty theft on his crime list, was still a human being who chose to be gentle with a child. In some ways, it restored my faith in humanity. I was driving down a country road at night. I saw a deer crossing sign and decided to slow down significantly for the upcoming blind corner. Came around the corner going about 20 kilometers per hour as opposed to the 80 posted limit. In the middle of the fricking road is some moron walking and wheeling his bicycle. I stopped about 3 inches shy of hitting him. If I'd been doing 80, I would have had to dig a grave. I like how you go right past, would have had to call the cops or fill out lots of paperwork, right to dig a grave. And you've got to dig quick too. If you spend too much time on the grave, someone will walk by, start asking questions, and, well, now you've got to dig another one. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out Easy Mode, also linked below, and subscribe. When I was in kindergarten, a man I didn't even recognize came to walk me home. Being as stupid as I was, I grabbed my bags and went with him. I'm not sure how, but he even knew my name, I think. We chatted and he walked me home, and as I walked through the doors, my parents ran to me. Turned out they were looking for me everywhere, thinking I'd been kidnapped. My teacher had told them that I'd left with a man claiming to be a relative. To this day, nobody knows who the man was that walked me home. I was chased by an adult male when I was 7. My mum asked me to deliver some eggs and sugar to a neighbor. Typical upper-class, northeast neighborhood, no crime. After I delivered the goods, I started back home, about a quarter mile. There were no streetlights and it was very dark that night, dark enough that I could barely see anything, when I got to a long bend with bushes on both sides. I just passed a driveway when I heard a loud rustling behind me, so I jumped and looked back at the same time, and I saw a large, dark figure emerge from the bushes towards me. I was a fast kid, fastest in my class, fastest in my soccer club, and all I could think of was how dark it was and how if I tripped on something, I was a goner. I could hear a man's grunt and inhales and exhales close behind me. I couldn't hear his feet though, just his breath, and it sounded like he was no more than 5 feet behind me. I kept thinking all I had to do was get within sight of my front yard with all those lights and he would turn back and quit. But when we got that close and we were running in the light, I could feel him pressing harder, and I felt like he was getting closer. I decided to take a shortcut through a hole in a row of bushes that bordered our land. My siblings and I had used the shortcut pretty much every time we walked in that direction, so I knew there was a 2-foot drop to the driveway. I ran and ducked through the hole and into my driveway, and I could hear him crash through the bushes. Didn't hear him fall, and he was still after me. When I got to about 20 feet from my front door, I no longer heard him, which was good because I fumbled with the screen door, and in doing so, I got my pinky finger caught and cut off the last knuckle. I opened the heavy front door, jumped inside, slammed it shut and locked, screamed out for my dad, and didn't notice my finger was missing a knuckle until my mum let me go from a long hug. My dad ran out after the guy with a weapon, but he was gone. My dad came back, fished out the end of my finger and put it in a bag of ice to take to the hospital. But they said it was pointless, no pun intended, to try and reattach it. Forget why exactly. The police took my story, looked around, but aside from the bushes being jacked up and some grass pressed down in an obvious pathway across my yard, there was nothing. A few months later in a neighboring town, there was a boy about my age who went missing while walking from a friend's house late at night. Then another a few months after that. I never heard anything about the fate of those kids, and for all I know, it's not at all related to my being chased. But it erased the idea I tried to believe that maybe some guy was just messing around. A scenario that let me forget the fear of going outside at night. The boys' disappearances also made me very appreciative for life. And fast feet. Sorry for the long story, I haven't really thought about it in a very long time, so retelling it has reminded me I need to talk to my 2 kids about being safe around people. And maybe I should have them come with me to run the track for a few laps. Years ago, I was walking on the sidewalk during one of those silent hill days that San Francisco has sometimes, the entire world filled with fog, every sound muffled. Still on the sidewalk, I turned to cross the street and paused for absolutely no reason with my hand up in front of me, and felt something tingle on my fingertips. Something flat and yellow appeared and then disappeared in front of me in a flash, at hip level, without making a sound. It took me about 10 seconds to realize what I'd just seen was a taxicab streaming by at about 50 miles per hour that had been unable to see the road and had driven onto the sidewalk. The tingle I felt in my fingertips was my hand touching the side of the passenger's side window. In short, I'm the luckiest motherfricker on the planet. See, I've never witnessed one of those pea-super fogs that makes it literally impossible to see the road you're driving on from your car, but I feel like this is more of a driver problem than it is a weather problem. When I was around 9, I went roller skating with my older friends, who were around 12 years old. We had just skated out of our neighborhood area when I realized that I forgot something. So I skated home, which was literally 2 minutes away, got whatever, and headed back. I found out that my 2 friends had crossed the small road while I was gone and had gotten hit by a driver who ran the red light. It was a hit and run. It was especially sad because one was a longtime ballet dancer and she was never able to recover from it. Mum and I were coming home from the mall when I was 10. My mum says that she thinks the car behind us is following us. She makes a series of random turns, and the guy is still behind us. She sees a cop car sitting in the parking lot of a grocery store, so she pulls into the parking lot and drives up to the cop. The man then hightails it around us and out of the parking lot, flipping us off as he passes us by. I'm still curious as to why he was following us. When I was about 3 or 4 years old, I was watching TV in the basement with my dad while my mum was out with her friends. We heard the door open upstairs and someone walking around. My dad told me to go upstairs and say hi to my mom, and being lazy, I refused. A few hours later, my mom came home and she asked my dad if he'd moved some of the stuff in our house because it was missing. We'd been robbed. If I hadn't been so lazy, I would have gone upstairs and that guy might have taken me too. He might have also seen that someone was home and fled, but the other option is really scary to think about. I also avoided a confrontation with robbers. When I was in high school, I took courses at the college 40 minutes away, and the pizza joint where I worked was relatively nearby. Sometimes on days when I had a huge gap between class and work, or no work in the afternoon or evening at all, I would go home and take a nap, pretty much completely undressed. One day I had a long gap, but I decided that I needed to go get some new shoes for work, and so I didn't end up going home that day. I got a call from my mum as I was trying on shoes that someone had broken into the house. If I hadn't decided to buy shoes that day, the 2 to 3 men who broke in would have come across me in the back bedroom, a 17-year-old girl sleeping and undressed. Yikes. In short, brought shoes instead of napping at home and avoided confrontation with robbers in my groggy, undressed state. I was four-wheeling with some friends up in the Rocky Mountains last summer. I'm not from the US and this was my first time, so I was just a passenger. Everything was going normally, at least as normal as I think, yelling yee-haw while listening to the Team America soundtrack, when we took a turn a little too sharp and high-centered on the edge of a cliff. It was like slow motion as we slowly crept towards the edge and I decided to put on my seatbelt. The car got stuck on a mound, but wouldn't move backwards. I think the mound was the only thing that slowed us down enough not to go off the cliff. We were literally an inch away from plummeting to our doom while "America, frick yeah!" was blasting through the speakers. We don't let Corey drive anymore. I hope you see this, Corey. You're an awful driver. I was 19 years old, traveling by car alone through some pretty isolated towns. No cell phone. My trip was about 9 hours, and when you drive for that long, you end up driving with the same traffic for a while. There was a truck that had passed me and then slowed down to the point where it passed over and over. I was a little annoyed, but other than that, I didn't think too much of it. When I pulled over into a small gas station, it pulled over behind me, but didn't drive up to a pump. As I stood there while the gas pump ran, I noticed a man in the truck watching me, but didn't return the stare. I went into the shop to pay for my gas. As the cashier was putting my payment through, he looked surprised at something behind me. I turned around and my body felt like it could jump out of my skin. The man from the truck was standing close behind me, close enough to touch me by bowing his head. He didn't move, just stared. I walked around him and went to the restroom. I locked the door to the restroom as well as the stall door. When I opened the door, he was standing there waiting. As I walked to my car, he followed me. I stood by my locked car, keys in hand, looking at the man, who was a few feet behind me, in the reflection of the window. We stood there like that, him staring and me waiting to unlock my door. I was afraid that if I unlocked the door, he'd do something crazy like push me in and take off. What was probably almost a full minute later, he slowly walked around to the front of my car and said, "You be careful out there," before getting back into his truck. I got into my car, locked the door, and waited. He didn't move his truck to pull out until I moved my car. I got ready to pull back onto the highway, waited until a chain of a few big slow logging trucks were about to pass, and then pulled out quickly in front of them, nearly cutting them off, before gunning my poor little car's engine to speeds it had never before been at and has never been since. I hoped that I'd run into the police and get pulled over, but I didn't. This was near a piece of highway where women have gone missing before. In short, possibly could have been a missing woman along a dangerous stretch of road. "You be careful out there," were some of the most chilling words I've ever heard. In middle school, I volunteered to work one period for the school library rather than have study hall. I got along really well with the head librarian. I'd say he was the first adult I thought of as a friend. He was really friendly towards me. A few years later, I came home from college on break and my mum starts asking me questions about him. Turns out, he had been inappropriate with several people at the school. In short, didn't become the victim of the librarian. Now I have self-esteem issues. When I was very young, probably 1 or 2, my biological father hired someone to take out my mother and I so that he could leave the country. We lived in Europe and you couldn't just leave without taking your wife or kids, and he didn't want to pay alimony. Fortunately, my biological father lied to the guy to convince him to do it and said that my mother was awful and that I was a brat. The would-be murderer saw us in a park and decided to warn my mother at a party he knew they'd both be at later on. A few clarifications: this happened between 1989 and 1991 in a country that was still technically a part of the USSR. My mother told me this story and I verified it with relatives independently. If we're all going to be skeptics, then I guess I can never be sure if it actually happened, and I can't trust anyone, but if I have to go through life thinking that, and thinking that my mother lied to me for no reason at all, then I'd rather believe a lie. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out Easy Mode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.